Hussein is a 17-year-old Syrian refugee in Canada. He is attending high school and lives with his parents in Hamilton, Ontario. He arrived in Canada 4 years ago and now holds a permanent resident status. Hussein fled his country due to war and the high threat of bombings, missile attacks, and killings. He found Canada a safe haven and feels his human rights are protected. Since he is learning about Canada, he is quite new to the term Indigenous and can't pronounce it correctly. He thinks it is what Canadians were called in the past. He has now learned to read, write, and speak English well enough to understand the news and local announcements in school. One day he reads breaking news on TV that mass graves were found at residential schools. Hussein is familiar with two words, graves and schools. He gets curious and Googles it. He is shocked to read about his dark chapter, which reminds him of his traumas, and he doesn't know how to talk about it. Statistics Canada reports that as of 2016, 3.5% of Canada's total population were new immigrants, with 11.6% admitted to Canada as refugees, 26.8% joining family already in the country, and 60.3% admitted under the economic category. These statistics highlight the importance of cultural diversity in Canadian culture, with projections of Canada's foreign-born population reaching 30% by 2036. Teacher-educator Lilac Moram highlights her own experiences as a new immigrant to Canada, noting that many new arrivals in Canada receive little to no information about the history of colonization and the effects of government policies such as residential schools, leaving them to deal with this information through the stereotypes and negative images of pop culture. Often many people are learning about history of Indigenous people while processing their trauma. Educators must do a better job teaching Canadian refugees about the history of colonization in Canada while addressing the needs of all immigrants and refugees and their unique identities to support their mental well-being. The solutions. Educators must continue to give a voice to students by supporting teacher education on the microaggressions that marginalized students and their families experience in school. The demoralizing impact of microaggressive behaviors can have an impact on student well-being, and by addressing this, students will develop an improved sense of value in themselves. Schools should make a defined effort to determine the starting line when understanding their hidden curriculum in order to determine the teacher knowledge base and to help deliver content that is engaging, inclusive, and impactful. Programs such as the Beginning Teacher Equity Conference through the TDSB highlight the need for culturally relevant teachers in their early years to improve the challenges faced by new immigrants and refugees in Canada. Students arriving in Canada as refugees may bring with them their own experiences of trauma. To support their mental well-being and to properly educate them on the history of Canada, pre- and post-colonization, educators should ensure that students understand the history of Indigenous people before colonization. Closely aligned with cultural humility, this will allow students to see that their own culture is valued within Canada and will enhance their feeling of self-worth, offering them a renewed sense of belonging prior to learning about challenging topics. By educating children on the history of Indigenous people, students will be better equipped to understand the atrocities of colonization. They will not carry any predetermined misconception of the Indigenous population in Canada. This can be done by using resources such as the interactive map hosted through the Canadian Encyclopedia, where students can explore the languages of Canada beyond English and French and to gain better understanding of the importance of multiculturalism and language in Canada. As students like Hussein learn about the discovery of children's graves in residential schools across Canada, they may lack the ability to process information and how it pertains to their lives. As noted by Maram, many new immigrants and refugees believe that coming to Canada meant that they had arrived in a safe haven, and to learn of the struggles of Indigenous people through colonization will be a shocking experience. While residential schools no longer exist in Canada, the coverage of inadequacies faced by migrant workers, such as poor living conditions and exploited labor, will only elevate their insecurities around their safety in their new home. Teachers must scaffold the teaching of these issues to support the social and emotional learning of students while appropriately addressing social issues. An excellent way to support the well-being of all students is by using the CASEL framework as a guide to instruction. By implementing this framework, educators can protect the emotional well-being of students while teaching material that might be socially, culturally, or personally challenging, depending on the variety of lived experiences in the classroom. The 5 competencies associated with this framework include self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skill, and responsible decision-making. By delivering trauma-induced information through this framework, educators can work to improve the protection of the whole child through the formation of a support plan that supports the student in the classroom, at school and home, and in their communities. By enhancing the social-emotional learning of students through this method of delivery, students are better prepared to receive and process information independently and in a manner that protects and supports their well-being. These resources can be shared with parents to help support a collaborative effort in addressing challenging topic matters. Developing affinity networks and allyship groups in schools are ways in which teachers can support youth activism, cultural diversity, and equity among students from marginalized communities. Forming these groups in schools allows students to gain confidence in their identities, have a strong sense of belonging, and in turn, take on leadership roles in their communities. Affinity networks are for students of like identities, while allyship groups are for all students committed to learning about equity and justice. They allow sharing of lived experiences to help bolster the power of youth. As noted by Gonick et al., often the voices of young people are not valued, so it is important to give them a voice to become advocates for justice. Ensuring the safety and well-being of students is a responsibility shared by all educators. When supporting students such as Hussein, educators must understand the unique history that each student brings to the classroom. By implementing these strategies, students will feel better supported in the classroom and prepared to address the issues of Canada's complicated history going forward.